Roxy, thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to make an exception on this podcast once again. I usually don't really invite a lot of English-speaking guests on this podcast just because most of our listeners are German-speaking. But once in a while, when I feel like there's a person who really has a lot of interesting thoughts, then I'm like, okay, let's just do it just for my own pleasure. And I always feel like those conversations with you in the last few weeks, months since we got to know each other, always stimulated a part of my brain. And on the same time, I also feel like you have a very interesting lifestyle, something I feel kind of intrigued of, just like listening to your stories and the way you're living. And I think that's also a really interesting topic for the chainless life, a very unconventional way of living. So I would love to dive into your life a little bit. But before we do that, we have a very classic question here on the podcast. And it just starts with, who are you?
So broad. And I feel in life to define is to limit, but we play the game of roles, and so we'll do that. I feel like above all things, I'm a lover in life. I feel that what life is to me is to really love it, which means to accept each moment I'm in. And there's certain things that bring me closer to a feeling of loving life. And that's where it gets into what I want to be my roles in life. One of the primary is being a writer. I feel like this gives me the opportunity to really observe what's going on around me with a sense of curiosity, and then to metabolize my own experiences and to basically understand the world. It's why I love writing. It's why I love philosophy. Another aspect of myself is working in social justice. So I worked in a variety of different nonprofits through the years. I feel a fundamental to me in life is seva, being of service through the act of giving energy, education, which is in a sense also what you do, to educate and to show a new method in the way of living. And a huge part of my life is honestly just adventure. And that's a part of loving it, is the spice and risk of what it means to fully live, which is to experience and to be open in my experiences, which has led me to traveling the world primarily alone and in more open ways than a lot of conventional traveling is done.
Yeah, and I think that's the really interesting part for the listeners, or hopefully also the viewers who see you right now. I think it's the first time I was actually able to put the tripod on the lowest level.
Yeah.
Because how tall are you? 5 foot?
5'1".
5'1". Okay, that's like a 150 probably in centimeters, 150 centimeters. You're super small. You're a woman.
Yes.
And you're traveling the world for like 8 years now, mostly solo. You consider yourself a naturalist, is that true?
Yeah.
So maybe you can also dive into that part. I'm just curious because a lot of the women who talk to me, one of their big objections is like, can I travel alone? Can I really do that? Is it safe? Because also you told me a lot of stories of how traveling sometimes is not safe. And that's why we also wanted to focus this podcast obviously about intuition, like how maybe your intuition is a part of your success, if you want to call it like that, in sense of like you never actually died. You survived so far.
That's a low bar for, for success. I think it's a little bit higher than just not dying, but yes.
Yeah. Before we dive into intuition, I'm just curious about, first of all, the decision you made to travel with 19. How come and yeah, how did this all came together? Just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, and I think this actually goes into the topic today, which is intuition. And from a really young age, there was the feeling of being constrained. And the feeling of being constrained came from different societal pressures and the fact that I straddled two worlds. So my parents are Indian, and then I'm I was born in America. And there was kind of a lot of different feelings of not fitting in. Yeah, of being Indian in a small white town, but then being a Yankee in India. And this caused me to feel like there were a lot of limitations put, especially with the way I am, a woman, being the child of immigrants, and knowing that there is more to life than this small town. And so a lot of the way intuition works is letting go of the culture. The intuition itself is beyond culture. And this is also why I identify as a naturalist, and why I'm also like a nudist. I'm naked a lot. Is this feeling of what it means to be beyond the culture we were placed in. And when we think about intuition, so the body itself is over 1 million years old. There's a lot of ancient history in this body. And the mind is only about 100 to 200,000 years old. So the body is a lot older than the mind. And there's a feeling of resonance and knowing that only the subtle body can give. And this is a feeling. And we can call it, intuition. And from this really young age, I had these feelings while I was in nature of knowing that there's just so much to life than what I've been handed. And so it's kind of, when you're living in an intuition, it's very different from desire or fear. It's not the feeling of I want or I'm scared of. In a way, it's kind of freaky because it's a knowing that you can't explain. And there was this knowing from when I was really young, and it kind of forced me to leave everything behind. So, yeah.
So can you just give us a snapshot of this moment of you making this intuitive decision? Like how did that happen with 19? Like, did you confront your parents? Did you say like, hey guys, I have to talk with you? Or did you just leave? So can you just give people like an image of how that works?
The image would basically be, for me, a lot of the time it's been visual. Even the life that we live on this island, it came to me as a vision first. So there was, when I was 19, I just had the feeling that I had to go to Spain. Yeah, I just had the feeling I had to go to Spain. And so I left for the summer and just did it. And that wasn't a super huge jump compared to what happened later. And I think this is why people start to have existential crises as they become older, is you get more in the grooves of living, and there's more to lose because there's more responsibility. And that's also a test, is what are you willing to lose to be in a form of integrity? And this is why intuition is freaky, is because you can't explain it, you doubt it. And the culture will make you doubt it. And a lot of my life has been being labeled as crazy. I gave you this example once. We talked about this. When I came to this island was basically the height of COVID. And everyone in the US was saying that COVID would just be an Asian disease. Like, come to the US, it's safe. This is some weird Asian shit. Just come and be safe. And there was such a inner knowing that that wasn't true. And I told you I met a man while I was silent. I was practicing a day of silence, which was part of a spiritual practice I did. And we didn't even have a conversation, but we had a connection. The next day when I could finally speak, he asked me to live with him. So I just intuitively was living with a man that I hadn't even really spoken to. And then to this day, we're still best friends and we were lovers. And to the outside world, it looks fucking crazy to move in with a man that you just met when you were silent and to live on an island and not go back home. So there's things that feel right, but when you're saying them out loud to other people, they look insane. And that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, I mean, it's still definitely considered crazy, but I think we're getting there because there's like books like Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, which just like show the people that the whole idea of being normal is a myth. It's basically just almost like an ideal. We want to fit in, but it's actually not true. And what you said resonated a lot with me, this whole idea, this whole notion of more to life. I remember the same age, around 19, I was like standing in the store I was working, and I was like, this can't be it. I was so sure. Nobody knew. Nobody told me anything. It was no knowledge. It was just a feeling. There has to be more to life. And what you said, and this is maybe where we can also dive in a little bit to like the idea of intuition. You said something about it's beyond society or beyond culture, intuition. I'm not sure if that's true for me, from my experience, because I feel like we lost a lot of the society, like at least in the West, we lost touch with society, with intuition. But if I, for example, look at the Yawanawas in Brazil, or just like very ancient tribes, it's almost like they don't have a lot of knowledge, but they have such a deep intuition. So do you think this is just because they're like so ingrained in nature? Do you think like it's just because that's also like almost like a part of society in a very primitive way, but still really important, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when I'm referring to we've lost it because of culture, I'm talking about my culture. I'm talking about the culture of America. Yeah, because you will be conditioned out of it because of... So the issue with the mind is the mind can rationalize anything. And what intuition is a subconscious storehouse. And scientists would call what's happening thin slicing. So you're taking copious amounts of data and you are able to have a rapid cognition of it. And the more you experience, the more your intuition will be fine-tuned. So there are certain types of intuition you can have, and this is why it's not the opposite of knowledge. It is exactly knowledge. It's knowledge that happens in a fraction of a second. And you brought up a really great point. So let's move to more indigenous cultures. And this goes into the naturalism. We have in our body an animal-like keen sensing. And when you watch even like a cat, it has this ability to pick up on frequencies, on energy. It's very attuned. There's like a symbiosis between the inner world and the external world. And it gets difficult to feel that when there's too much noise. And when there's too much busyness. But when you're in nature is much more simple than being in a city where things are more complex cognitively. There is the feeling of understanding the land and therefore the body. To me, the land is an extension of the body. And intuition is a very keen-like sensing. And I think especially women have it within them as much as men because of our history of being gatherers, of having to sense which berries were dangerous or poisonous to eat. Even men, the fact that they could physically overpower us, knowing how to energetically read a situation. So much of intuition is going into the primal in a way, is going into the actual sensing mechanisms. And it's different than being sensitive. I feel like a lot of the times there's it's rude to say to someone like, you say it in a rude way, like, oh, you're so sensitive. To me, there's a difference between emotional sensitivity and actually being sensitive. Like I am through my doors, my five senses. I'm literally aware of what's going on. Yeah,
it's a good point. The sensitivity versus being emotionally highly sensitive is definitely not the same thing. Where I want to bring this back is to adaptability, or like just like how we humans adapt to our environment. So indigenous people, or let's just say you living in nature as a naturalist. Also, a point I want to just add here is that you're also living very minimalistic. Like I always considered myself living minimalistic with like one suitcase, but you don't even own a lot of clothes. Like you say, even clothes are basically not necessary. Also with this idea of like, hey, look, there's so many people having way too much we can share. So I really feel like that's a really interesting approach. And that's why the way you are basically living is an adaptation of the environment you're living in. And my question to you, and it's maybe already a little bit advanced for where we are right now in the conversation, but do you feel the way we're going right now, or I'm pretty sure you think the way we're going right now is the wrong one, because it's almost like the more we're living in cities with billions of things penetrating our mind every day, the more we have like Apple Watches and GPS and technology. It's almost like through the environment, we're losing intuition, but not because, not as a sad fact of like, oh, we're losing a part of ourselves, almost like it's just not needed anymore. It's almost like the more we start to have this like crazy technology, the less we're almost like dependent on this intuition. And people like indigenous people who don't have all that stuff, obviously they still have this old quote unquote conditioning. So my question is, on a very like to provoke this a little bit at this point, do you feel like we should as a civilization almost like start to go to nature back again to relearn intuition? Or is there almost like maybe also just a romantic idea of this idea of like that's where we came from, this is our roots and this is how we're going to stay? But if you look in 1,000 years, nobody cares about intuition anymore because the computers are 1,000 times smarter to basically calculate those millions of informations, because that's what basically intuition is. Like you said, it's like a superpower of somehow navigating a way more data than the cognition could do, but a little bit less precise, but still more information. So do you feel sad about the fact that we're basically heading away from, like going away from intuition?
So I would actually disagree with you, because I don't think we need to, I'm not saying that you need to live in nature in order to be intuitive. I think it would help just with the quieting of the mind itself and going back to this root of simplicity. I have lived in cities. Actually, the translation of my last name literally means city dweller. I come from a lineage of people who come from Mumbai, one of the biggest cities in the world. The computers, as of now, cannot process who you should be in a relationship with, who you should do business with. These are the important things. These are really important things where I think intuition comes in. It's not just, oh, because I have a GPS, so sad I can't use my intuition. For me, intuition comes with more pivotal things than just what direction am I going in and how can technology help me with that. Intuition helps with the fact of how do I actually want to structure my life? And an example of this in relationship is, or for many women, what I see. Mm-hmm. They meet someone who on paper is really good, like has the nice job, really kind, would be a good dad, whatever it is. There's a feeling, but they ignore the feeling because on paper, everything is fine. And there has to be a place where you can't ignore anymore. And where, to me, intuition comes from like a very raw place of honesty. And this is something that other people can't decide for you. And it's not what technology can decide for you. And you don't need to go isolate yourself in the woods for it either. It demands a loss of what you think you want and what you think you fear. It's actually a really quiet place. And when I think about when people confuse intuition the most, and that's why cities are another place where it gets really confusing, because your desire system is being played with constantly.
Exactly. Dopamine, and desires, all the time.
Yeah, and your fears also. For me, there's a couple of things I do in life, which is I completely stopped watching mainstream news. I don't partake in it. Yeah, there's certain things that I've turned off because I know that it's messing with my capacity to feel.
And with your intuition. It almost like smuggles in shitty data into your supercomputer, which is basically intuition in a weird way, you know. And
it's interesting to see that a lot of the time for Western culture, the more cultured the person is, the more miserable and the more there's a smallness to perception. If I was constantly watching Fox News every single day, and I met a black person on the street, I would maybe think, oh, it's an intuitive feeling that I just don't like this person. Sorry, no. If you are fed the same type of information constantly, you will think it is your own. And so this is the importance and fundamental part of nature and silence. You can find the silence yourself. There can be part of the days that you carve out for only you.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. So in that sense, it is almost like a little bit, a part of it is society or conditioning still, because if you grew up with Fox News, it is maybe your intuition even which is like somehow like seeing that black person and things like, oh, is this dangerous? And you can't even change it. It's almost like you have to, in a weird, it's almost, for me, it's still very comparable to social media, AI, algorithms right now, because I don't want to, I'm completely on your point of saying like, I'm really happy that I'm intuitive and that I relearned almost a lot of my cues. For me, intuition feels like an invitation and not like a story. That's how I always differentiate it. As soon as I feel my mind is telling me a story, which creates fear or desire, I know it's not intuition. Intuition is way more subtle for me. But in a weird way, what, for example, social media does, at least Instagram, it shows me the right people in the right moment. Like, for example, somebody like Adya Shanti, you know him. He came to me like almost like 7 months ago when I was in a place where I needed some guidance, spiritual guidance, and all of a sudden he just turned on my Instagram. He came as in the explore feed. And I feel like a lot of those things, a lot of those algorithms nowadays, they almost compensate for the lack of intuition people have. It's almost like they learn so much about you that at some point they might know more about yourself than you, just because they have the evaluation. For me, it almost works as a replacement for the lack of intuition people have nowadays, because it is almost like a co-appearance. Like we have this technology, and on the same time people need less and less and less of those subconscious cues. I don't say it's a good trade-off, but I just feel like it is where we head, and I'm curious what the consequences could be for us. I think one of the things we already see is that we can't really survive in nature anymore. Like we lost it, right? Like there's people, they can like indigenous people can smell stuff. They have like this idea of where people were walking. They still have like the whole cues. We don't have all of that. And I just always bring it back to the fact that we're just adapting to whatever is in our environment. And yes, if it's Fox News, then maybe our intuition is actually flawed in a way. Or would you still say that this is still something else? Like there is almost like that there is a quality which can't be touched by any programming.
Yeah, to me, it really feels like in order to get to that place in which we can touch the part of us that actually isn't using words, and that's a key part that you touched upon. It's not a story. It's not using language or words. And it's not measurable, which is why people don't take it seriously often. With also...
Do we have maybe some examples for people who are still listening and thinking like, I still don't know what intuition is? Like, how would you use your intuition right now in your everyday life? What is an example, how people could relate to it?
Yeah, so when I get to higher states of being, there is a process in which I feel I'm not doing anything. Yeah, life is working its way through me. And I feel like this takes, and even still, it's a continual process. In everyday life, I am noticing my different centers. So the mind is super loud, the body is subtle. For me, intuition happens like right around the navel area. When I'm feeling fear with something, for me it's a contraction. So I'm noticing certain things my body is telling me. Fear is a contraction. There's like a feeling in my navel area where it's just intuition. And then desire is very heady, like super, super heady. And so when making decisions, I pay attention to these spheres of the body and the way in which they're responding. And I have learned not to question it. So that's another huge part, is knowing I feel like we've talked about this before, suggestibility. I don't feel I'm super suggestible. I feel like with certain things also there's a lack of compromising. With certain people that I feel like I just don't like, I don't need to be mean to them, but I don't need to engage, and it's just a feeling, and that feeling is actually enough for me to respect. And especially with the hitchhiking and stuff like this alone. Yeah. There is there's cold reading and hot reading in life. And a lot of what I do, I feel like, is cold reading. So watching the person's face, their eyes, the way in which they're looking at me, and it goes back to that animal-like sensitivity. And to completely just listen. This is the hardest part, is everyone, and even yourself, will try to trick you out of it. And this is where also the social games come in, because so much of intuition is not having any white lies anymore, not engaging in certain things that you feel you should because there's strategy in life to doing things. There's a difference between strategy, which is outcome based, you are trying to get something, versus being intuitive and allowing the splendor of life to happen because you trust it. And to me, this is a fundamental, is the fact that I do not feel life can ever betray me. I trust. And this trust is not a blind trust. It comes from, and this is why I keep going back to the fact that women need to experience in life. Women need to be engaged in risk. Women need to have a lot of sex if they want to have a lot of sex. Women need to taste life. And this is how intuition is fine-honed, is you start to trust yourself with the small things first. And slowly over time, you'll watch the way the world is unfolding in a state of just synchronicity and awe. And the fact that you don't need to force or coerce or try anymore or have grand strategies for life. There are decisions being made, but they're not being made through like a very tight effort.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate a lot with what you just said. I feel, for me personally, there is this choice I always have between intuition and strategy, and I always feel like they actually help each other. They're complementary, because you can also base some strategic decisions based on a lot of like almost like experience, like you said. Like traveling the world is almost like you feed your mind so many different moments, experiences. And that's probably the most valuable differentiation between knowledge and experience. You know, like knowledge creates knowledge. You can start to evaluate. You can start to actually like have numbers and measure stuff. And with experiences, they don't really add up in like knowledge, maybe in like clear, measurable data points, but they help you to actually make decisions based on a gnosis, something which is not coming from the cognitive. So when I think about those two operational systems, and I mean, that's how we build, they have to interact with each other all the time. The best example where I always try to explain people what intuition is on a very scientific, or at least on a psychological explanation is, let's say with lying, like at some point you just feel like you just get, this person just lies to you, but you don't know why. You don't know that she's actually lying, but you just feel. And it's usually almost like the pattern recognition of all the times you've been lied and you found out, and your subconscious now has enough experience. You've been lied enough times to actually realize this person is lying right now. But the hard part is not even to actually recognize the feeling, but to actually then also, like you said, listen to the feeling. And this brings me to a very crucial question here, which I also don't have a real answer yet, but maybe you have an example. Are there good reasons, or are there even moments in your life you remember where you consciously decided not to follow your intuition with a good reason? Are there exceptions in your personal experience?
There have been things that I feel I wasn't made to do, but I was being celebrated and congratulated for going on a certain path in life. And there was the feeling when I was younger, when I was fresh out of college, I was 21 or 22. I got a job at IBM, and then I also got a job right after working for this crazy billionaire. And I was being like very much celebrated. You're making so much money. You're so young. You're doing everything right. And I knew I wasn't. Yeah, there's such a deep knowing, like, this is completely not what I'm supposed to do. But I will play this game because I knew that it was making my parents feel like I was accomplishing things. And I was very consciously aware of the fact that I was going against my intuition, and the whole thing lasted like 2 years. And through it, life was not, I was being celebrated, but life was not a celebration because I was not living in an honest place. I was living in a place that other people wanted me to live in. And so we do this all the time where you put someone else's needs above your own because you feel like they need it more than you maybe. And I think we do this a lot with family and friends. There's a feeling of wanting to, especially being someone's child, there's a feeling of wanting to give them what they've given you. And I think having the immigrant experience and having parents who were once really poor, you feel you want to give back. And it's part of also the illusion of the American dream is like, my dad came to America with $20. He had he had nothing. And so this feeling of, you're surpassing intuition for other people's desire system.
I can definitely see what you mean. What I want to add here, the word reason, we actually had this conversation too. I'm a big fan of reason. I feel reason is a beautiful place to be. And I feel like sometimes reason and intuition are competing with each other as well for actually really good reasons. And it's because I have this with a lot of times with clients. So some of my clients, they know after 4 weeks, 5 weeks, they know, okay, fuck, I'm living in a lie. Like my job is actually not what I want to do. I don't want to continue this job, but I right now don't have any alternative. And is it smart to right now just like quit and just jump into the cold while not really knowing where this is going? And you probably, the way you structure your life, you would say, of course, this is your biggest calling ever. Just trust and go. But the experience I've made is that some people, when they actually go too crazy on their intuition, that they almost like come into a place they're not really used to, and their nervous system takes over, like the fear, the existential fears start to kick in, like safety, how do I make money? And then they actually can't function anymore, and they actually worse off after. So that's where people, for example, I always recommend people not to quit right away, but actually like maybe reduce or build something next to their job, so they can actually feel like they're going slowly but constantly into the right direction. And that's where I feel like there has to be a balance between reason and just like avoiding the uncomfortable with the argument, I'm just being intuitive. Do you know what I mean? Like, is there a place for reason for you in the intuitive lifestyle?
Yeah, of course. I think reason actually is a fundamental. And what most people, everything in life is how you frame it. First of all, safety is huge illusion. Nothing is safe. And the more in which we can accept the fact that nothing is safe, the more we can actually learn to embrace life as a whole. And so if you are in a job you hate, but there's reason for it because there are bills that need to be paid, whatever, I would say, yeah, you're taking small conscious steps in the right direction every day. For people like me, where I don't have a family to raise, I don't have so much responsibility. My responsibility is towards myself. And in the beginning, it is extremely uncomfortable because you are braced with the fact that everything in your life is it's like a death in a way. There was one pivotal period of my life where I left New York City, I left my long-term relationship, I bought a one-way ticket, and I just completely left the country, and I didn't return back to the United States for 3.5 years. And there was it was uncomfortable because I had zero idea what I was getting into. It was just a feeling. But that feeling led me into actually beyond my dreams. Like everything that I've been given is beyond even my comprehension and how I've been given it. It's greater. And we are navigating things in the way in which we feel most comfortable in life. And for me, life has always been about risk. Yeah, I'm not living authentically if I'm not embracing the fact that nothing is certain. Like literally nothing is certain. So many of the constructs that we create are for this false sense of security, and it's not real. Yeah. And so I think everything in life is how you frame it and what you're willing to lose. What are you willing to lose? Your job is shitty. Are you willing, and this goes back actually to the way I live very simply, am I willing to let go of the glamour of New York, of being somebody who makes money when they're young, of being somebody who has a high fashion model as a boyfriend, of being somebody blah, 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 blah. And I was willing to let go of all those false sense of identities for something that is bigger than identity itself, which is, embracing the mystery. And so, I think a huge question is, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to lose? And it is like a death. You're letting go of a way of life. And for people who have been doing that same way of life, knowing that it's not for them, for many people are doing the same shitty job for 10, 15 years, you get even more trapped. So I would go almost the opposite route of what you're saying. And if your clients have been stuck in this forever, at a certain point you're making excuses for why you can't. And we both know this, the only limitations are the limitations you create. It's your own mind. And I think the more you trust life, the more life trusts you and rewards you.
Yeah, it's like I said, I'm thinking for me, this is very inspirational because I'm talking about this for years already, and people are like, yeah, but look at you, you're big, you're successful. They don't really see it. But you, like you said, like you are very risk friendly, you like risk, and your result is that you live a very special life, and it was not easy, and it will not be easy for anybody, I know. So that's where I feel like people make excuses. On the same time, I just try to be considerate, almost like for the people who don't have this primal trust in them, which actually feel completely like paralyzed when certain things happen, almost like their conditioning is so much stronger than what we experienced, that as soon as they don't have money, they actually feel like they're losing it. And maybe that's where they have to go through. It's almost like their dark night of soul, to actually sleep on a couch of a friend for a few months and to actually realize like, oh, I'm still not a loser just because of that. I'm actually just like going through something. It's almost like you said, how do you frame it, right? Like, how do you frame it? And I think one of the biggest problems with intuition is that if you follow your intuition and you have success, you say like, oh yeah, I just followed my intuition, everything worked well. But some of the times I feel like people say when they follow their intuition and they are not successful, they say like, yeah, I made a mistake. Like that's usually. But
it goes back to the fear or desire. It probably wasn't intuition. And that's part of the listening. And part of the honesty is like, I actually wasn't listening to my intuition at all. I just wanted it. And when I look at the mistakes I've made in life, it is because I thought I really wanted something that I didn't need at all. And no, I don't think it's people making a mistake based on their intuition. I think it's them confusing intuition with something else.
Where would you go with, we talked about reason, how would you say responsibility? You said you're responsible just for yourself, but let's say you want to build a life with more responsibilities. Like I have responsibility over my company, maybe there's going to be kids one day, maybe there's going to be family. Do you feel that's going hand in hand? Because you could also just say, I could also just claim that you're also scared of responsibility, almost like that's your fear.
Yeah. And I think this actually goes back into value systems. So you talk a lot about values. And I think some of the confusion is, I want my life to be about freedom. And in a way, there is less responsibility in that, in a very and I mean this in a traditional sense because I'm not interested in having a family, but I feel a responsibility towards the way in which I live. And this is why I told you the nonprofit work is extremely important for me. This is why, being there for friends is extremely important for me. This is why I don't care about profit engineering and giving away money is important to me. And so the responsibility I feel is the way in which I live. It's the way in which I do my life. It's the way in which I don't eat meat because I feel a responsibility towards the environment. It's a way in which I tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable because I want us to deepen our friendship and relationship. And so there is a responsibility happening all the time that we have. Some people it's grander for others, especially when you want to create life. I'm at the stage where I don't. So yeah, you could say that I'm not, it's true. I'm not super responsible person. I'm not someone who owns a Fortune 500 company and wants to be responsible for 20,000 people's paychecks. It's not the way I've framed my life purposefully.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair to say that because obviously the way I look at life is integral. So I like Ken Wilber's, even though I don't like his writing as much. I like one of his favorite quotes of mine is, nobody is smart enough to always be wrong. and that's why I think reason, responsibility, intuition, it all goes hand in hand, and it comes back to values actually, right? And that's why I feel, again, even though you had the statement that intuition is beyond society, like the way I see the German, like the classical German person quitting his job, this is going to be a hard dark night of a soul for those people. You know, like they're going to like completely be frightened. Their nervous system is going to be hyperactive, hypervigilant of fears, you know, and the dangers. And that's why I would love to have almost like a roadmap of like how to build intuition, like practically, you know, like we talked so much about your way, and I can definitely see that every person who almost follows their inner guidance system, that's another way to put it, right? Like follow the voice which doesn't really ask questions or like have answers for you. It's just like a gnosis. And is there any practical way of approaching this, in your opinion? Is there a way back? Is there a way of no return where people you meet, you think like they will never be intuitive? It's just too late for them, you know? Like, is it going away at some point? Because, for example, with people who get gaslighted for years, it's almost like they actually lose their intuition by a person who's telling them like you're fucking wrong for all you feel, and then it gets distorted. And that, I feel like I don't want to compare Germany or the States to a psychopath, but in a weird way, I feel like you get gaslighted by the government a lot nowadays. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
How would you approach it? How would you, if you would be an intuition coach, and people would come to you and ask you like, "Hey, Roxy, how can I build my intuition back?" How would you approach it?
Okay, so I would start with the way I've done it for myself and what I've seen as working. Number one, and it actually goes the same with finding inspiration in life. There's a lot of overlap between these more like ephemeral things. But one, do not overconsume. Be so choosy with the information you put in your head. And it was funny with what you said about algorithms, because I feel the exact opposite about mine. I use my Instagram, when I've tracked it, it's 15 minutes a day. And they give me, I told you, weird pictures of Selena Gomez and things I'm completely disinterested in and I'm not engaging at all. And choose, like really actively choose what you consume. And to me, because I'm a world traveler, I have many different friends all around the world, I go to my news source is my friends and independent media. And media I feel I respect. And reading old literature. So, okay, choosing very, very, very consciously what you're consuming. There is no mindlessly scrolling. In this, if you want to actually be intuitive, the mindless scrolling needs to be, you need to put time limits.
So no non-reactivity.
Yeah.
No consuming.
Over-consuming.
No over-consuming. Yeah.
Avoid over-consuming. Go to places. This is where I think nature is important. Go to places where the culture has not put their hands into it. Go sit by a river. Go lean on a tree. When I live in New York City, I'm always going to Central Park and I'm literally just holding trees and I'm sitting under trees and I'm looking at the leaves. Try to clear mental space just from having access to the simplicity and wisdom of beauty. This is super important for me. Third, go with the feeling in the body, the somatics, and let the intellect follow. So you're leading with intuition and the intellect is following. You're not leading with intellect and then the intuition is following. So this would mean not over-questioning yourself. When you make the decision, and this goes into decision-making as well, you're not half in, half out. You're all the way in. Yeah,
because otherwise you can't distinguish afterwards what you actually did.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you can't reevaluate if it was a good decision or not a good decision. If you didn't go full in, you will always say like, oh, what would have happened if I would actually go all in? So you'll never know.
You have to fully make the decision.
Yeah, full decisions.
You have to be okay with people. The biggest one for me is the fact that people will ostracize you because it won't make any sense in the beginning. And it's almost like what they say, the saying, when you're too close to the tree, you can't see the whole forest. When you leave your job and you're sleeping on your friend's couch, it will suck. But there is also the feeling like it will suck for a month and then things will start to fruition. And that's also where the trust plays in and knowing how temporary, the suffering is. And so being okay with being completely ostracized. Yeah. People telling you you're crazy. I can't believe you let go of that potential wife. She was so amazing. I can't believe you left the country. I can't believe you left this job that was making you so much money. Get rid of the questions. Just go with the feeling. And this is why meditation is so important, is the overthinking is a killer for everyone. Yeah, the over-analysis, instead of being in life, the constantly pulling it apart and asking a million questions, just live in it. And also I would say for the people who don't sit down on a zafu, who don't want to just sit down, there are different ways to access meditational states. For some people I see it's art, it's entering flow state while painting, it's cooking a meal with devotion. There's different ways to be in the state of just quieting down so you can actually hear. This is a huge part, is it's the aspect of what does it mean to actually listen. When I'm listening to you, I'm not speaking at the same time as you. I'm sitting here. And so it's the same with this inner voice. Yeah, as you said, the voice that doesn't use words. You have to have this really keen perception.
Yeah, and like you said, the trust that it's gonna unravel the way it has to. I think that's the most important thing too. And there is people, they lack that sense of trust, I feel, which maybe is a reason or like a causation out of the fact that they never actually made any courageous decision yet. You know, it's almost like you first have to have courage. You first have to do something, even though it's scary, in order to prove yourself that you can do it. So I think that's where we actually are definitely agreeing. And also, yeah, I mean, we agree on a lot. It's just that for me, I can look at something completely detached from my own preferences. I mean, with all the things you say, I'm basically agreeing with most of it. It's just that when I look at technology and where we are right now, I feel like I don't know how fucking powerful this all will become eventually. And if at some point, maybe there will be a day where your iPhone will tell you, don't date this person. It's going to be fucking horrible for you in a few years. Go to this person, you know?
Oh, but it would be unfortunate because we see the way the more and more sometimes we're using technology, the more it kind of deadens us inside and dulls us. The juiciness of life is the fact that I don't fucking know. It's so amazing. Yeah, I want that. I don't want to be dictated to. I want to learn through experience.
Yeah, this is the biggest question. what do you want, listener? Do you want to learn by experience? Do you want to make, because I also believe a lot of the mistakes you have to do it for yourself to actually have experience and wisdom. Like wisdom comes from just actually embodying a lot of things you went through. But there's also this like very masterful art of like learning from other people's mistakes, you know, and I feel that's also not easy, but it is definitely, because it's almost like the same again with like the intuition. It's like you see another person did this mistake and you basically already know that you're going to make the same mistake. And then, at least for me, sometimes I still made the mistake. Even though I knew it's going to be a mistake, I still made it. It was weird, but it's almost like this is how it is.
Yeah, but there's also there's multiple aspects of self, and there is a part of the self that doesn't always want to be wise, that wants the mistake and the messiness and complexity of being human. And so I think there's a part of us that enjoys making the mistakes. There's a perversity. There's a perverse sweetness to our own pain sometimes, and I think we want it.
Yeah, so the big question I basically had here for me today is intuition an escape of reason, or is it overcoming reason? You know, like, is it overcoming cognition? Like you said, like first you go with intuition and then with reason, like you start to think. Or is it for some people still an escape? Like, it's really hard for me to distinguish, because exactly you can frame it the way you want at the end. After every decision, it's actually proven that your mind is always going to frame it the way it fits in your personal worldview. So this is almost like proven. That's also why there is no rational decisions. There is actually only rational information gathering, but the decision will always be based on a feeling. So that's what the science actually found out, the neuroscience. So it is somehow always an intuitive decision. Just the question is, like you said, do you trust in the first feeling, or do you start to distort yourself with a lot of information and then almost like go away from it, go away from the values? You know, there's principles and then there's logic. And it's really hard sometimes to distinguish what's better. For example, with like stock picking, like when we talk about like stocks and very high numbers and exponential growth, this is so abstract that I feel like my intuition is not even able to understand exponential growth. So it can't compute the decision for stocks. So when I look at stock picking, my intuition will always fail me, or will fail me more often than actually going in a logical way and checking all the numbers of the companies and actually make sure that the CEO is a good man, that he actually made good decisions in the past. You know, it's almost like it's almost like you said, like the more you're in the city life and do the capitalistic system, the more you want to like have this like worldly success, the more you will lose the more you will use probably your strategy, and the more you want to be maybe happy, maybe just content, maybe just like in peace. Maybe that's away from logic and more like intuition, and therefore also values, you know.
But going back to the market and to stocks, some of my friends who are doing the best in the stock markets, they use their intuition. And it comes back to what we were talking about before, which is intuition is taking the enormity of your experience and condensing it. So for the people that have been doing it for years, that read the news every single day, that understand human psychology, basically, so much of the markets is understanding
sentiment.
Yeah, the way people respond to it. Macroeconomics, whatever else. So these people, they use their intuition, but the intuition is built on a huge foundation of knowledge. And that's why they just trust the feeling, because the feeling is fine-honed from a colossal amount of experiencing it and doing it and making mistakes. Mm-hmm. Making mistakes and then watching very carefully the trends and the patterns. And it feels like, even when we think about strange things like synchronicities in life, or why certain things just happen so perfectly, perfect timing, all these coincidences, there feels like there's an intelligence beyond our mind. For me, this is the zero doubt. I don't know what it is for you, but there is something so beyond just my own mind. I can't fathom it. And it's a trend, or it's a pattern, or it's just an intelligence that I can't fully register yet. And maybe you felt it when you've had out-of-body experiences or been in very deep meditation, this feeling of contentment, and that really actually everything is perfect.
Yeah, I really like Carl Gustav Jung's theory of the collective subconscious, because that would make a lot of sense, that synchronicity starts when you start to connect with the collective intuition, almost like the world completely in one, you know. And for me, he still is like the master of all those like subconscious dynamics. Also, when we talk about dreams, they also play a role, I feel like, in understanding the mind, and also what's beyond the mind, maybe what is the signal which receives all of that, you know, like there is, or let's say like that, like your brain is almost like the receiver for the signal and not actually creating it itself, you know. So that's how I sometimes feel. And it's like I said, it's integral. It doesn't mean that you have to go only into that state, but it's like you actually go there and you bring it back into the world, and then you just make decisions again, and you start to learn, you build your decision. I feel like making conscious decisions in general, I would add that to the list of building better intuition. Not just making clear decisions, full decisions, but also making them very consciously. Because if you don't make them consciously, it's really hard to say what was it at the end of the day. Were you reactive and just living life based on impulses, or were you still like taking a moment, like saying, this makes sense right now for me, and then you can actually remember and then reflect on it, and that's where you need your mind again to actually build your intuition further and further. So what is in your scope right now? When you tap into your intuition right now, what do you feel? Is there something for you happening? Like, can you actually also have ideas about the future, or is it really just in the present moment?
So even when you say, can you tap into your intuition right now, that's not the way it works for me. Yeah, it's coming during when I actually need to make pivotal decisions, is when I hear it the most clearly, is when it's most necessary. So life is giving me some kind of invitation or initiation, and I'm very aware of what's going on within to me, like the body is an antenna of consciousness. And if I can be aware to what is happening between me and then my environment as a whole, then I'm understanding. So it's not like, oh, I can just tune in right now and my intuition is telling me something random. It's happening to me, and I am listening to it.
So it's completely not connected to like manifestation or like creation of your future.
I would say my whole life has been based upon intuition. Yeah, and it's a feeling that I can't just, there's no trying. Yeah, it happens. It just happens.
Yeah, I make an example. This house here, I saw it already 12 years ago. Like not here in Thailand. I saw it in LA, but I always knew I'm gonna have a house on the ocean. And that's why I mean, like, it was always there. And I don't know what if I could call that intuition too, because it was always like a gnosis, like a knowing. And I really believe in manifestation, not in the sense of like whatever I want to have is going to manifest, but actually almost like a feeling of like intuition, like, oh, this is going to happen. And so far everything happened when it was there. So I was just curious if you would now tap into, or not even right now, but if you have like almost like images sometimes coming to you where you can see yourself in the future, to wrap this podcast up, almost like a projection of where your intuition will lead you if you follow it. Big call. But
it's kind of freaky, because when I'm thinking about it, I don't want it. But when I've been meditating, I've been getting visions of holding babies.
Fair enough.
No. Yeah, and I don't know if you can call that an intuition, but it's similar to you. Like I knew I was going to live a lifestyle like this on this island. I had visions of this island. So many of the exciting loves and experiences I've had is through just a knowing, and it comes visually. There's feelings as well. But in some of my most recent meditations, there's been a baby. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, I mean, fair enough. You don't want a baby, but there's like an intuition. So that's it's an interesting point, because maybe in a few years we're gonna make a podcast again, and then we can like see what actually happened. To be continued. Thank you so much, Roxy, for sharing your wisdom with us. Literally your wisdom. It was kind of hard for me to really talk in English. I'm not used to it, and I'm also super tired somehow. But I was actually following you a lot, and I think we have a lot of really good material for some reels. Maybe even we can send them to you, because you also have your own podcast now. Maybe you want to plug it real quick at the end for people who are interested in the naked life.
The chainless life and the naked life.
The naked life.
Yeah, it's been nice.
What is it about?
I think what I'm yearning for most in life is the sense of actually what it means to be naked, which is to be open and exposed in a way in which the world can touch you. So to me, it's important to have cerebral nakedness, emotional nakedness. Yeah, even physical. You've seen the way I like to be naked. And it's me having like an honest dialogue, more vulnerable conversations with breaking preconceived notions of what we see as truth. So, yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes for the English-speaking people for sure, and maybe even some Germans will stalk you.
Great.
I mean, after our picture got deleted from Instagram, right? It will be the next.
Yeah, and my visions of babies. Wow. Yeah.
Nice.
Great.
All right. Let's wrap this up. Thank you so much. And we see us with some babies soon.
They'd be beautiful.